Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lisa Poff. I'm the project coordinator for the Deafblind Services Project here in Indiana, and I want to welcome you to our virtual workshop, Active Learning with Olaya Landa Violard. I'm going to turn it over to you to get us going.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Sorry, you're going to probably see some of my fur babies. It's like she just decided to wake up and walk across. So she'll probably jump up here for a little while. Those are just, the beauty of working at home. So my name's Olaya Landa Villard, and I'm so glad to have all of you here. We are going to talk about active learning, and I don't know how much everybody knows about active learning, or if this is just kind of a refresher for you, or just to get like a different point of view of active learning. So see some examples of some of the characteristics that are involved in active learning, and then just have a discussion and answer any questions that you might have. And Lisa, like she had mentioned, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box, and she will be letting me know, or jumping in if there's a break in the conversation or in the presentation, or when I'm done, then we can address all the questions as well. So pretty flexible, want it to be like a conversation when we get there. And I just thought about this. I can't see you, but you can see me. So I think we can still do this activity that I have as part of the presentation at the beginning. But let me just real quick, let me give you a little bit of background about myself. I have been in the field of education well over 20 years. I don't want to give my age away. I know I look very young to have been in education over 20 years, but I have. Most of that time has been working with children with visual impairments, blindness, deafblindness, multiple disabilities, and in particular, those kiddos who are bilingual, English language learners, Spanish, English. I am bilingual and I'm bicultural. I'm Mexican, Puerto Rican. I grew up in Houston, Texas. Went to Texas Tech University in Lubbock to get my PhD in special education with an emphasis in visual impairments. I worked as an educational diagnostician for students with visual impairments in the program for students with visual impairments in Houston ISD. Basically, we had 300 kiddos in our program, and they were my caseload. I had all 300 kids. I was responsible for making sure that all of their initial assessments were done, any special requests for assessments were done, and of course, there are 3-year assessments. In the summers, I carried a caseload of kids. That was just how it worked out for my schedule, because we provide services year-round, especially during early intervention, and that's my favorite age to work with. And so now, and then I was a professor at Illinois State University. I am now the director of the Connect Center at APH. And I am an adjunct instructor for Indiana State University. So right now we are going through practicum, and then in the spring I will be teaching the assessment course. So after this webinar, we have about 3 more webinars to the series that I'm doing, and the last 2 are going to focus on strategies and how to implement those strategies for kids who are multiply impaired. And so some of the stuff you're going to learn about today, we're going to delve in a little deeper during those final 2 webinars. So just to kind of keep that in mind as we are working. Okay. Let's see if I can make this PowerPoint work. Okay, so what is active learning? It is providing developmentally appropriate activities for children so that they can learn new skills. And the key word is developmentally appropriate. Kids who are who have special needs, or who are are multiply impaired, and with those kiddos who are multiply impaired with either deaf blindness or blindness, we have to really look at the developmentally appropriate types of activities that we're going to do with them. And sometimes, because age, sometimes that's a hard balance to strike. When you have an older child who is multiply impaired, but physically, but developmentally, they're not, 11 or 12. They're more like 4, 5, or 6. So we always have to keep that in mind. But looking at this is providing these developmentally appropriate type of activities, especially for these kids with special needs, so that they can learn new skills, and providing that environment so that they can be an active participant. So we right now are going to become participants in an activity. So we have one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8 attendees right now. So let's see, I want, if possible, Morgan. I'm sorry?
Morgan is our captioner.
Oh,
So
okay.
you
So
don't have 8.
we have 7.
Yeah.
Okay, so how about Amy, Susan, and Michelle? I'd like for you to quickly look around where you are, go around your house and grab 4 items that you can like throw up in the air and catch. Okay, I'll give you like 20, 30 seconds. It shouldn't take very long. I'll show you what I have. I'm borrowing my daughter's squishies, her little squishies. And this is our favorite Pusheen, and it's a Unikitty Pusheen. Okay. So.
And they can turn their cameras on if you want to see. I mean, I just keep them off at the start.
Yeah.
It's up to you.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter to me. It's up to them if they want to be seen trying to do this activity.
I think we want to see.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to get started with it, and hopefully you've gotten a few things that you can participate in with this activity. Hold on a second. Okay. So we're going to take one of these items and we're going to throw it up and catch it in the air, right? Okay. So there you go. Got my one. Easy enough, right? I'm even getting fancy switching hands. Maybe I can win one of those prizes, Lisa, without without. Well, not the best.
I don't know if everybody else knows, but every once in a while you lock up.
Oh no. Okay. Well, am I locking up now?
Not now. You did
Okay.
there right after you said you could win a prize.
Oh, I did? Oh, okay. Well, so they didn't see me throwing the one. Oh yeah, they did see that, the 1. Now I've got the 2. Yeah. So I'm trying to juggle with the 2. All right, so now here we go. Here's the real test, the 3. Okay. Oh, well, I guess I should keep my day job, right? And now the 4th, I don't even know. Should I even attempt? Well, I tried. There we go. I lost them. We're done. Okay, so thinking of that activity, okay, the type of participant that you were, who was it, Morgan? No, it wasn't Morgan. It was Amy, and I lost somebody. Was Susan? There were 3 people. Now I don't know. Everybody moved. You moved around, so I lost you. So for the 3 who were what type of participant were you? So if you were a juggler, you were an active participant, right? You were actually involved and you were trying to juggle, which again, I don't know about you, but I definitely need to keep my day job. If you were not a juggler, then what type of participant were you? You were a passive participant, okay? Not rocket science, but just think about it. When we have our kids who are multiply impaired and they're in our classrooms, it's really easy to do stuff either to them or with them than having them actually do the activity. And I've sat in many IEP meetings, and that is one of the biggest fears that I hear from parents, is they don't want their child who has special needs, who is really involved, who needs a lot of assistance. They don't want them to just be passive. They don't want them to just be sitting in their chair, put to the back of the room, and basically just taken care of, like babysat, versus being involved in what's going on in the classroom, and not just involved, but actively involved. Because sometimes we see involvement as we have circle time, and the student who has all of the special needs is in a wheelchair with everybody else in the circle, and circle time is happening, and the student is just sitting there. Like, there's no real activity for them other than them being present. And being present, I'm talking physically present. They may not even be checked in, because why would you, right? If stuff is happening around you and it doesn't interest you, and you really have no vested interest in it, it hasn't caught your attention, you just zone out. So really, are they being active learners at that point? Sometimes I've seen them engage with a switch. But again, with that switch, who is hitting the switch? Is it the student hitting the switch? Is it an assistant hitting the switch? So that's where we have to really look at how we are helping those students with the most significant disability, the methodologies, the theory behind it. That is where we can use that to get those kids who typically don't look, quote unquote, look like they can learn, because they all can learn, but they all learn in a very different way and at a very different pace. And you'll see that as we move forward. I have lots of video examples to show you. We won't see the entire videos themselves, but we'll look at some of the clips from the videos to give you an example.
Alaya,
Uh-huh.
you have a lot of things going on your internet connection right now, because you cut out again for a second. I just didn't know if there was something you could stop.
No, I don't have anything.
Okay.
Hold on. Let me see something. Give me a second. I'm gonna turn off anything right now that might be, drawing down on the Wi-Fi. Okay, I turn that off. I'm gonna turn off my phone Wi-Fi too. Let's see if that helps.
It's strange because we haven't had any problems before, but every, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes, suddenly there's like you just freeze.
Yeah, it's probably my Wi-Fi, just because in this town, sometimes I live in a small town, and sometimes it's just a big drain every now and then, especially when the kids are in school right now.
Gotcha.
And on homeschooling. My daughter's not on the computer, so that's good. But let me, I'm gonna put my internet like in airplane mode. All right, let's see if that helps. So I turned off all the ones that were around me. So let's see if that helps. So the key factor in active learning is, the student needs to participate, and I put that in all caps, in the activity, okay? So I think I've driven that point home. So the foundation of active learning, if you're not familiar, it's based on the work of Dr. Lilli Nielsen. She's a Danish, or was a Danish educational psychologist. She's the second of 7 children. 4 of those kids, 4 of her siblings were born blind. So, I mean, that's a lot of kids, and that's a lot of in one family. So it seems she died in 2013, but she definitely lived a very full life and really contributed so much to our field, and in particular into how we work with this particular segment of our BI population, or deafblind population. Okay, so for her, the active learning is this, it was a total approach for promoting the development of individuals with severe multiple disabilities. And again, she was really bought into it, because 4 of her siblings were blind. So she really had, she was a stakeholder as well as a researcher. It was very personal for her. And we do have, once you get into researching more information about active learning and looking at for some resources and things like that, there are actual videos of her working with kids. It's kind of like when you see Dr. Van Dyke working with kids. It's so neat to be able to see that. We were lucky enough to capture that before they passed away, because of just the influence that they've had on our ability to really make a difference in these kids' lives and in their families' lives. So this approach, it's for those learners who function up to the developmental level of about 4 years. And that's what I was saying earlier. It can help some of those kids who are slightly older, or at least at older developmental level. It just depends on like if they have CP, how severe their CP is. So there's different things, but for the most part, developmental level is different from actual age. So that's why I was saying, if you have a 12-year-old who's functioning at the 48-month-old level, you don't want to have activities that are babyish, right? Or that because our students still deserve dignity, and we don't want to be looked at as like, oh my God, this big kid is playing with, this baby toy. And again, that is another concern that I've heard when I have been in IEP meetings, and I'm sure concerns from parents before. So we always have to be real cognizant of that, because you have to think, if that was my child, how would I feel knowing that they're using, and there's something else that would work on the same skill, that would look definitely a lot better as far as age appropriateness, or developmental appropriateness and age appropriateness. So it definitely for our learners with some significant multiple disabilities, sensory impairments, vision or hearing loss, or deaf blindness, and kids with autism. And we always have to be cognizant of that fact about autism, and how some of the behaviors that kiddos with autism have sometimes look like they're manifesting themselves in our kids who are deafblind, or kids who are blind with other disabilities, with cognitive disabilities. And so we have to be real careful about not either under-identifying or misidentifying a student with autism, because that has its own repercussions down the line. However, a student who has autism-like behaviors, but who is not autistic, can still benefit from some of those strategies and methodologies. And if they're already receiving special education and related services as a student with multiple disabilities, they can receive services that a student with autism might receive, even though the child isn't autistic, because those methodologies appear to work for them. So that it's not labeled that drive services and placement, it's need. Always remember that. And there are, how do I say this? There are administrators who would disagree, but the law is clear about that. So just know that if you have to advocate for your student, they don't have to have a particular label to get a service that they need. It's based on need, okay? So now, how does this approach differ from other approaches? Okay, so we're looking at this particular approach is looking at the whole child, right? We're doing a holistic view of the child. We're looking at their social and emotional development, motor, cognitive, and sensory skills. So it's more the development of the child versus the academic development of the child. Where they're functioning and how they're functioning, and if they are meeting those developmental milestones in the order that they need to, or at the same pace as other children without disabilities. And so that's where this is really different. We're not looking for math, reading, and writing skills here. We're looking at their whole development and where they are on that scale of development. It's very learner directed. It is focused on the child developmental level. It is self-initiated activity prompts from adults. Well, I'm sorry, without prompts from adults, which is hard because when we're working with kids like this, like we right away want to give them a cush ball and say, oh, look, how does that feel? And you're going crazy, right? Like, oh, that feels so good. You know, you're talking to them and you're explaining what the cush ball feels like, and you're doing either hand over hand or hand under hand. And it's overwhelming for the child, and really they're not learning. And in some way it takes us to just leave the cush ball next to their hand and walk away and wait and wait. And sometimes it can take the entire day. Sometimes it can take days for the child to recognize that something is there, and then that they want for them to want to move their hand and find a purpose for moving their hand either over the cush ball or next to it, so that then you recognize, okay, there's engagement there. There's this recognition that there is something there that I can interact with. And so that's kind of hard for us as teachers, because we want to get in there and help them and guide them. But a lot of this approach is very much self-guided. We have to learn patience. It's kind of like wait time, but this is the ultimate test of wait time for us. So that's something to keep in mind. And appropriate adult-child interactions are based on the learner's emotional development. Okay, so we have to know what sets a kid off behaviorally when they are in an alert state. When are their best behavioral states for interaction with activities that they decide they want to interact with. And a lot of our kids, sometimes if they have seizure disorder, they're on some heavy duty medications and they sleep a lot. So we have to find those biobehavioral type states that they fall into during a certain time of the day. And that will be the time to be observing the student and getting an idea of when they want to be active, and then what they are being active with. So we have to, it is definitely based on those emotional development for those kids. And a lot of that deals with whether the room is cold, whether the room is hot, are they hungry, are they wet, if they are not potty trained yet. And so all that ties into how our kids are ready to learn using this approach. So this approach, the active learning approach, lends itself to this dynamic learning cycle. So in order for kids they are aware of the object or the activity that's in front of them, and that they're interested in it. There's an example, which we won't see that example today, but there's an example video of a student who likes to bang things, and the video is on him, and he has like a little room, which we'll go into a little bit more, but it's basically like this little box, and it has objects hanging, but nothing for him to bang on itself, like a drum or a box or an empty oatmeal tub. Those things make good drums. And so you're watching, he's there, and he knows that thing is there, but he wants nothing to do with it. He's just there sitting. And then they bring this drum and they put it right in front of him, and he's aware that the drum is there, and he shows his interest by starting to bang on it. So it's like we had that little room where we thought, okay, he might interact with it. Just sat there for 20 minutes. until somebody brought something that was caught his attention and made him want to use it. And so that's that first point. Like, awareness can occur sometimes with our kids who are not very mobile, sometimes by accident. They might kick their leg and they hit something and it makes a noise, and then they recognize that and they want to keep doing it. So sometimes it's something that maybe we can't make happen. Sometimes it happens by accident, and we see that, have to then provide opportunities for that accident to happen again, so that then they are aware and interested in that activity. Excuse me. So then the second point is when the second stage of this dynamic learning cycle, again, that ties in with active learning and ties into there's 5 characteristics of active learning that we're going to get to in the next slide, where they become curious about the activity that they're engaged in and then become very active with it. They want to keep going and keep going and keep going. You'll see a lot of this repetition. That's part of one of the characteristics, because they're curious and they're active with it and they want to just keep working on it. So they're, at this point, they are independent. They're independently active. You're not having to do anything other than leaving the object there, and they are the ones being active with it. You're not having to do hand under hand, hand over hand. You're not having to talk to them. They are in their own world, being active with whatever that activity is. And curiosity is what helps us learn, helps us, motivates us to, especially like if we're trying to learn to walk, right? With our kids who are visually impaired, we have to figure out, how do we entice them to walk? Sometimes it's toys that make noise. Sometimes it's mom's voice. So we have to have something that entices them and gets them curious, so then to actually become active in their learning. And then, of course, stage 3 is that completion of learning or habituation. So now this is when, okay, the kid is used to whatever that activity is. They know it's there, but it's just there. It's part of it becomes part of their quote unquote personality. With them, but then there's this empty brown cardboard Amazon box that might be sitting there that you haven't broken down yet, and all of a sudden that becomes a toy. And you're like, okay, I have this $50 toy sitting here for you. You're done with it, you're bored with it, but oh, there's this plain looking box. I'm gonna jump in there and play inside the box, make the box my toy. So that is when okay, they're bored, they're on to something else. We need to then, they're ready for some new challenge. Whatever that challenge may be, it depends on the child and where they are developmentally, okay? But again, once they're done at that stage 3, their new interest went from this expensive toy to something totally different, totally new. Their curiosity, they became aware of this box in the room. So again, that's just an example of how these stages go, and then they just keep going as the student becomes aware, becomes very active with it, then gets bored with it, then they're ready for something new, and then you take on that new challenge for them. Got active participation, we've got repetition, developmentally appropriate activities, reinforcement, and limiting distractions. Okay, and as we get through these, you'll notice that some of these characteristics are also good characteristics to think of and to use when you're working with a kid who has CVI. Especially the limiting distractions, because kids with CVI, they can only handle sometimes one sense at a time. And you'll notice that as well with active learning. Because, you think about when we are trying to learn something new, if there's a lot of noise in the background, if there's TV going on, there's kids running around, it's hard to focus and concentrate on what you're trying to learn at that point. So we take that and we think about kids who have multiple disabilities, and that could include this visual impairment with CVI, and how that can affect this limiting of distractions, so that we can then, that will allow them to be active with what we want them to be active with, to show us that they are engaging with something, some activity, some object, something that we, I mean, and that's the real important thing here, is that they realize that they can make stuff happen in their environment. They're not just there, just passively taking information in, passively just being a part of the environment. They can actually have an effect on their own environment, which is an important thing. It doesn't seem like that should be like, well, yeah, you know, we all have an impact on our environment, but these particular kiddos don't always recognize that. Okay. Oh, there we go. So for active participation, we want to, you know, allow for that active participation from the child. If they're not actively participating, then you need to change something. Kind of like that example I gave you of the little boy who had that box there with, like, there was just these objects hanging, spoons and forks and whisks and different things that were hanging, but he had nothing to do with it. So eventually, I'm sure they, understand your expectations for the child. In just a minute, we're going to see a video where a little boy, excuse me, a little boy's laying down like on a swing, and he's just laying there, and because there's nothing else around him to engage him or for him to engage with. And so like that expectation, you're looking like, well, it's time for a nap, right? He's got a blanket, he's on a swing, he's by himself, there's no toys, there's nothing there to distract him. So that the expectation that the little boy thought about, or, you know, maybe even naturally, inherently, was, okay, I'm just gonna lay here. But then when the environment, if you want that little boy to engage and move and be active, we have to give them something in order to do that. We have to give them something. Doesn't mean that we have to interact with the object that we're giving them. It just means we have to change the environment for them, so that then they become aware that they can become an active participant and make things happen in their environment. Okay, so we're gonna see this video of Ryan before and after. This is an example of active participation. So let's see if, yep, there it goes.
A title reads, Ryan before and after.
Can you hear it, Lisa?
Yeah.
Okay.
These two video clips are taken on the same day. In the first part, we see a young boy lying on his back on a swing. He is covered by a blanket and turning his head from side to side, but otherwise not moving. In the second clip, which is just minutes later, the blanket has been removed and active learning materials have been placed all around him. Notice how he has become extremely active, kicking his legs, moving his head and arms. These two clips illustrate how important adult expectations are and what a difference the environment makes in encouraging learning and active engagement.
A title reads, Video courtesy of Penricton Center for Blind Children.
Okay, so you can see the big difference, right? I mean, before he was just so passive, laying there, he's all nice and cozy with his blanket. You know, it was like that routine, okay, it's time for a nap. He had a few toys around him, but nothing that was really getting his attention. when they put those those active learning materials there for him, I mean, he had them all over. He was, if you notice, he's laying on this on the like a mylar blanket, so that's crinkly, right? It's not soft, you know, and it's like a plastic. It's going to make noise. It feels different than that blanket that he was on. And then of course his little legs were kicking away because he realized he's making noise. He's feeling these beads. Looks like his leg is kind of looped into some kind of a foam hoop of some kind. And even under his arms, he's got these boards, and that, and again, as we move through these next few webinars, one of them will talk about materials, how to make these materials, where they come from, how you can get them. But you can see the huge difference it made for this child. He was now, you can definitely see the before and after. He was very passive before. With it. So think about that dynamic learning that we went through just a minute ago and how that ties into these 5 characteristics. So then repetition, okay? So we're looking at repetition and how repetition creates connections in the brain. And I always remember, I don't know if you know of, there is a CBI practitioner in Texas. Her name is Diane Shaline. She does a lot of webinars and trainings for Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. And one of the things that I always remember from the very first training that I went to with her, she was talking about like CBI and how when we are working with a child who is in a certain phase, if you're using the range, the CBI range, and she's like, if you are showing them this particular color in a certain way every, let's say every day, it's like when you are skiing and your skis are making a rut in the snow, right? Like kind of making, you go again and then go that same route, that rut is going to get deeper. And you do it again, and that rut is going to get deeper. And every time you do it, if you are theoretically able to put your skis right back in that same place and do that over and over again, that pathway is going to be created. So those connections are going to happen in the brain the more you repeat something, right? I always think about too, my sister, she was a softball player in high school. She got a scholarship to go to NYU as in girls softball. She, my dad made her throw like, 1,000 pitches a day. She had to, she had to do that every day, like the same, that repetition is what helped her get that scholarship. I mean, she used to throw the ball 60 miles an hour. They won all of their games because the opposing team was terrified to try to hit the balls she was pitching, because I remember catching a ball that she pitched to me and I thought my hand was going to fall off. It hurt so bad. So, you think about that repetition, practice makes perfect. So that's one of the other characteristics is the more the child repeats the activity, the better they get. And more, of course, you want to work on that. You can avoid any deficits that might occur. Thanks to help alleviate any weaknesses or make the weaknesses less apparent or less have less effect on the student. But those are always the things you have to always be kind of balancing between the two. That to be moved by the child. So just like what we saw before, there were no adults around that child. He was the one moving all the stuff and we were just watching. And it was awesome to see the change. You want to allow time for processing and allow time for problem solving. Our kids they can take a long time to process what is going on around them. Let me get this big cat off of here. Sorry. Eventually he would end up right in front of the camera. So I figured I'd beat him to the punch there. We think about when we're working with a kid with CVI, that's one of the big some of the resources on active learning. There are examples of kids taking hours before they actually have processed what's going on around them, and that there's actually something there that they can be active with. So I think as teachers, that's one of the hardest things to ask us to do, is to allow for that processing time, because we're right away like, oh, you see it, you can do it, you can do it. Look, it's right here. You know, I mean, you can just hear yourself doing that. And that actually slows our kids down and makes them not want to be active, because they just can't process too many things at one time. We also have to recognize that this repetition, that children will take short breaks. You know, they'll get tired of doing it, but it doesn't mean that they're done. They just need to stop and take a break, you know, get some processing time in, like, okay, what did I just do? I can't believe, you know, inside their little heads are like, oh my, what is this? This is fun. I like it. You know, and do it again. You know, you've played with kids probably before that again, and then eventually they want a break, and then after a break they come back, okay, again and again. So you think about that, and how these kids are going to need to take short breaks, and it might look differently for each kid. Sometimes their breaks are naps, because you think about them becoming so active, how taxing that can be on their little systems. And on their brains, right? Because their brain is making these connections, and it's working their body, it's working their brain. So, you know, it's just like when we're studying or trying to read something or working on our computer for hours, our brain needs a break. We get tired. Our kids are no different. It just looks different for them when they're taking breaks. You want to use multiples of objects, different, and like you saw with the little boy before, it wasn't just the beads hanging, there was this loop hanging. He had these things on each side of him, which in some ways I think kind of goes against the principle of limiting distractions. But it seems to work for these kids to have all these different objects or you know, and activities available for them, to take it all in. And so after all the research and everything that's been done, that seems to work for these kids. Again, it might to say we need to limit distractions, but yet we want you to use multiples of objects, but that for whatever reason works for these kids. So always think about that. And the thing about when you're doing that and repetition, sometimes it can become almost a pattern for the kids. Like they might, just like, for example, the other little boy that we just saw, he might learn, or in his own way has set up this system where he won't play with the object on his left side before he kicks the beads. So you might notice like this kind of habit might be happening, this order of events. So, and that's also really neat to observe, because then you know there's some higher order thinking going on here if they're able to make a routine out of the objects that are around them, and you haven't taught them to do that. It is just something that they do on their own. And when you see that, a lot of what we do as teachers for these types of kids using active learning is all about patience and observation. And of course, you know, some part by looking at what the kids are doing and trying to figure out why they're doing what they're doing, to see if there's any logic to it. Because if we find that there is, then we know that there are a lot of connections being made in their brains. And that's amazing to be able to see that from a child who looks, again, quote unquote, looks so significantly disabled that really all they can do is just be in their chair all day and get some socialization by being around other kids. But that's not what school is. School is not only for socialization, it's for them to learn. So with these types of things, going through these characteristics, keeping in mind the, you know, the whole dynamics of learning, you know, that circle, we can then help fulfill that objective of why we want our kids in school, even if they have so, you know, their disabilities, it looks so significant that it looks like they're just taking up space. And I've heard that too, which drives me insane, but I've heard that, like, well, that kid's just taking up space. Well, maybe because you're not working with them and they're not being active learners. And so, you know, we don't want our kids just there. Need to occur over seconds, minutes, hours. And so at the end of this presentation, I'll show a video of a student, and it takes you all the way from when he was not very active to being really active, but it over 4 years for this student. So it's going to be totally neat for you to see that. I know I was just amazed when I saw that video as well for the first time. Oh, let me see here. What time? Lisa, do I have until 30 after?
You have till 5:30, yes.
Till 5:30. Okay. I just want to make sure that we have time to see these videos. Okay, so I'm gonna play a clip. This is a long video. It's about an hour, but we're not gonna look at it. I have the timestamp here as to what part we're gonna watch as an example of repetition. And then we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. Oh, please work. It is working, but it's taking a minute. Oh, no. Well, oh, there it goes. All right.
On the screen that I want to talk about. I think most people have seen a child do this. She's going to throw everything she comes in contact with. So you'll see a person come in here and try to give her something, and she's going to end up throwing it on the floor. And so for her, we put her in a little hopsa dress. And we environment where she can throw all these balls and they'll come back to her so that she can. This is a position board we could make to allow a child to repetitively throw so that the items would come back to the child. Therefore, they can repeat and repeat and repeat throwing and learn that eventually the throwing becomes boring and they start exploring the objects on the board. So Roy, I know I only have a couple minutes, correct?
Yep, you're a couple of minutes.
Okay. Okay, so when I, thinking about this, and it's like, it's almost such an obvious thing. When we have little ones, like she said, when she talking about the first child, somebody gives them something and they knocks it off the table, right? And you put it back and they knock it off the table. Babies do that all the time with their bottles or their spoons when we're trying to feed them. Like it's a game for them, right? Well, all we have to do is attach something to it, and they eventually get bored by knocking it down, and it comes, bringing it back to them, knocking it down and coming back to them, that then they start exploring the actual object, right? And so I think that's genius that they pointed out here about having this child standing in this Hofstra dress, and then having all these objects that are tethered to the table there. So when the child throws it down, it comes back, and they throw it down, and so you don't have to be there physically to be picking up these objects all the time. And again, like she says, eventually the child will get tired of it. and themselves. And then the way there were a couple other examples. They used a belt that had a bunch of holes in it, or you can get a belt and make holes, but they do sell. I mean, my husband used to have a belt like that. Using the things that you have around the house and being creative. Use rubber bands and tie those wiffle balls around the rubber band, and that's something that they can throw off the table and bring back. So there's that repetition that falls in with those 5 characteristics. Okay. Developmentally appropriate play, right? So a big part of active learning, because it's so appropriate for this birth to about 4 years old. We have to look at those stages of development, and in particular Piaget stages of development. So if you are able to go back and refresh your knowledge on child development, Piaget is what you would want to be looking at. So these types of developmentally appropriate activities, are activities that are geared towards the child's developmental level, not necessarily their chronological age. So I kind of mentioned that before, where you might have a kid who's 8 or 10 or 12, but yet their developmental age is within that birth to 48 months, okay? And so it's one of the things, like one of the examples I always use is like, you're not gonna ask a kid to do algebra problems if they can't add, right? So it's the same thing with when we're looking at activities. We don't want to give the child or give them the opportunity to participate or be the active and engaged learner if it's something that's way out of their range of where they are developmentally. Like walking. I mean, not all kids are ready to walk, but yet if we want them to walk and make them try to walk because they're not ready. So, think about those, looking at play. And that's the other thing. A lot of this is all based on free play. When you look at what the kids are doing and how they're doing it, there's not an adult there. The adult set it up, and of course is supervising, but really it's free play. They are learning through play. And so for somebody who is not well-versed in how to work with these types of kiddos who are so special and the most fun to work with, they might think, well, all they're doing is playing. That's not learning, but it is. and it is backed up by research and practice. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. The other thing about developmentally appropriate play is you want to slowly provide new experiences to foster growth. So scaffolding. Once the child has that skill, then you start using that skill to build on to the next skill. In the developmentally appropriate chronological. Again, when you go back and look at child development happens in certain stages and in a certain way. Each skill builds off the other skill. So that's the other thing we think about with developmentally appropriate play. Also, reduce the conflict. To reduce conflict, the adult's expectations must meet the child's level of ability. So you're not getting upset with the child that they're not performing like you think they should. So that means they're not there yet developmentally. And so we need to go back and look at what we're asking them to do. Adapt the environment to meet their needs, their developmental needs, and make sure that the environment is set up correctly, so that the child can then explore independently. Kind of like what we just saw, the little girl was in her chair, and then they used these devices to stand the girl up, and they put all the materials there in her environment, and so she was able to interact and go through that repetitive characteristic, or that repetitive time period of learning. So we want to make sure that it's all set up for that, that their environment set up to help them with their active learning. We don't want to use hand over hand. We want to definitely use, allow the child, make sure that the objects are positioned in such a way that they can be active independently. So if we knew, like the last video we saw, the child likes to throw things down and we have to go and pick it up and throw things, well, we just put a band on it, some kind of elastic, and the child can knock things down to their heart's desire, and then it'll come right back to them, right? So they are independent doing these activities. So that's a really important piece to this. Again, a lot of times it's just hard for us as teachers to let go and just watch this happen. But when you think about it, if you have, you know, children, and you think back, if they're not young anymore, and you think back to when they were babies in that birth to 48 months, a lot of times, like I know with my daughter, I'd put her in her playpen, and I'd give her something that she could play with in there, so she's independent and she's, you know, pressing the buttons by herself or looking at herself in the mirror, you know, little things like that. And so it's really not any different from that. It's just you are in an environment doing this. So that is where I think a lot of the conflict comes, because it's like you, and like, you know, they're having fun, and well, yeah, learning should be fun. and you should be able to watch, observe, and take really good notes to be able to show the progression of how that student is learning and becoming more active in their environment, and learning that they have the ability to affect and change their environment. That is a very big thing, and active learning allows for that to happen. So now we have a video on developmentally appropriate play. Looking at the time, let me see, where am I? Just want to be sure that I have time to get to Jack's progression. I think we'll look a little bit at this video of developmentally appropriate play. We definitely won't watch the whole thing. It's like a 6-minute video. We don't need to watch the whole thing to get the point.
A slide reads, developmentally appropriate activities. A child explores and plays with objects in a classroom. An adult watches and joins in the exploration with her.
What is a developmentally appropriate activity? We often talk about doing activities that are developmentally appropriate with children, but we don't always stop to think about what that means. We need to be sure that we have an accurate picture of where a child is functioning and what developmental level this is. We also need to be sure that we have an understanding of typical child development so that we are aware of which behaviors and learning occur at different ages and developmental stages. This video is designed to show you what happens when a typical 2-year-old child is presented with tasks that are at a developmental level that is far above her functioning level. This girl, Adriana, has typical vision and hearing with no identified learning problems. Her Aunt Cindy, who is on the staff at the Penricton Center for Blind Children, has created this video specifically to demonstrate what happens when a task is not appropriate for a child's developmental level.
In this video, Adriana and Cindy are sitting at a table and are going to work on identifying letters of the alphabet. Cindy draws the letter A with a crayon. Adriana takes the crayon.
You do it. A. Yeah. Do it with your crayon. No, like
Cindy
this.
folds her hands over Adriana's
No,
hands,
we're gonna do it
writing
like
the letter
this.
A together.
A. No, no, no. A. No. A. No. No. A. A.
Cindy releases her hand.
No, 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 no.
Adriana
A.
scribbles on the paper. They both repeat the same actions
no.
repeatedly.
A.
So it's pretty obvious this little girl is 2 years old. She's not ready to write letters, right? You can see that the child getting frustrated. She's like trying to cut her aunt is asking her to do, and then her aunt else. Our kids are going to do the same thing. Developmentally appropriate will look a little different for our kids, especially again, like I said, when that age gap is really big, between what their developmental age is and their chronological. This is an example of what a child does and demonstrates to us, right? What our kids can't demonstrate to us, like this little girl can. They're frustrated, they're bored, they feel like, I don't know what you want me to do. But our kids can't do that. Our kids communicate in different ways. Sometimes it's crying, sometimes it's just going to sleep, sometimes it's a gesture or a noise or something else, but they are communicating to us just like this little girl is communicating. It's just not as obvious. So that's also part of our of knowing our kids, of observing them, and part of this active learning, this trial and error until we can figure out what's their interest to have them or help them become engaged and involved in their own learning without us grabbing their hand and making them. So this, with our kids, that they're overwhelmed, this is too hard for them. It's not as obvious to us for they're communicating to us that they're overwhelmed and this is too hard for them. So we need to be very aware of that when we're working with our kids. If something is not working or they don't seem to be engaged, it just doesn't seem like they even notice it's there, we maybe need to change it up. We need to change the position. We need to maybe change the lighting. There's just different things that and a lot of it is trial and error because again, our kids can't tell us. And a lot of times they just can't. And of course, that's where assessment comes in to try to help us figure out what makes the child tick. But part of assessment, a big part of assessment of these particular kiddos is observation. And a lot of them, and observations from different people. So then you can start to see patterns, and that also can help you with figuring out what is developmentally appropriate for them so that they don't feel overwhelmed and don't get bored, and then just shut down and give up. And then we have reinforcement. So you want to identify and use what's motivating to the child, adapt what's motivating to them, and set goals. Focus on emotional and social development, and understand the role of the adult in all activities. Again, I think our role is more of a than it is of a teacher, where we're doing that direct teaching. So we're learning because they are the ones who are going to be actively engaged. We're just kind of sitting back and observing. We're putting the stuff there and then taking a step back, waiting for them to recognize it and then start to engage and then do the repetition and until they figured out what this is and what it does, and then you get bored and now they're on to the next thing. Right. Part of this again with the observation is recognizing their how they learn best. Do they use their vision, smell, touch, taste? Is it kinesthetic movement? So that right there ties into that learning media assessment webinar that we did, I don't know, maybe a month ago. And that particular webinar goes through an assessment that we can use to determine the sensory preferences of our students. Using that information that we get, because a lot of it's based on observation, determine what activity they're learning and what activities are going to make them want to be active with the objects that we are presenting them with, that we're facilitating their learning with. So again, that goes back to assessment. If you didn't get a chance to attend that webinar, I'm sure it's archived, or Lisa's, like Lisa said, she's working on editing and getting the recordings up. Be sure and check that out, because it will definitely help you figure out what sensory preferences your students have, which will then help you with organizing an active learning environment for them. Okay, it's 10 after. Okay. So we will look at reinforcement and how this Zain is motivated to grasp objects. I don't know if it takes too long to load, then we will. It's taking too long and I don't want to, we're already at, oh, there it goes. It's a minute and 21 seconds. So we'll take a look at it.
You got 'em. You got 'em.
Elbow. Elbow.
Are there more balls on there? Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Elbow ball.
It's always so cute to see them when a child is like so happy with what they're doing, and it's like the reinforcement of feeling the sand and being able to put his hand in the it looked like almost like a cuff or like a bracelet. So you can see that reinforcement is he keeps reaching for things, moving things around, trying to put this on his hand, and so that's getting that child engaged. The adult was there to facilitate and try to move things back so it could be within the range of this child, their range of motion. Because of the CP, you can see how spastic the arm is and how it's tight, but it's tight, yet you do see the child reaching out and making the arm stretch because they're motivated. The object filming, you that little laugh, it's just adorable. That's why we love what we do. They're just too cute. Limiting distractions, we want to make sure, just like I said, it's very similar to the practices that we try to employ when we're working with kids who have CBI. We know that interruptions and distractions are going to happen, especially in the school setting. You talk about fire drills, you got people sometimes coming in and out, you got kids who have different schedules. Some kids are only there for half day because that's all they can tolerate. So you've got paraprofessionals coming in and out. So there's always distractions. So we just have to figure out how to minimize those. And also recognize that a child's tolerance or responses can change from day to day. It all depends on how they're feeling, when their medicines kick in, if they're on a new medicine, or medicines need to be adjusted because our kids are growing and, some of the meds are in weight, physical issues. So thinking about, because those items, those types of things are also distractions. They're not necessarily, sometimes they're inside. That the activities are designed to meet their developmental needs. So not making a child trying to write specific letters of the alphabet, that point scribbling and just, free play is the best thing. Our kids are no Again, they just express their likes and their dislikes very differently, and we just need to be more sensitive to that. Model appropriate coping mechanisms and use the correct phrase of educational treatment. And so when we talk about phase of educational treatment, the next webinar that's going to deal with working with kids with multiple disabilities, we're going to talk about the 5 phases of educational treatment that go into working with kids in active learning method. So we'll get further into that the next time. Of course, turn distractions into learning opportunities. So sometimes something might, get their attention. Something might fall, and like if it's a bell, some metal might fall and make a noise as it spins to stop moving once it finds its place on the ground. Maybe turn that into a learning opportunity. That something was and it's making noise, and so maybe now, since the child is distracted and interested in something new, that activity of having something fall and make noise might be the next learning opportunity that you have for the child. But again, if they're going to be knocking something down, you don't want to have to be the one to be constantly picking it up, so you might need to tether it. But taking advantage of those teaching moments, right? Those teaching opportunities. Communicate through gestures, vocalizations, actions, and simple work. Using the correct form of communication at the right time developmentally, and adapting to the student and their form of communication. What gestures that they're using and what those gestures mean, what one vocalization means versus another. You have a child, you tend to learn the different cries. And it's no different when we're learning our kids and how they're communicating to us and what those different vocalizations mean or different actions mean. And so that's something that we have to pick up when observing our kids and assessing them for figuring out. Let's look at this video of the progression of a child who has been taught using this active learning process. And to me, it's just amazing to watch. Oops.
A title reads, Jack's Progression. Jack lies on his stomach on a resonance board. A bead curtain hangs over his midsection. Jack lifts his head slightly and wiggles the fingers on his right hand. New video segment. Jack lies on his stomach on a support bench, with his hands in a tub of water with stones, and his feet in a tub of dirt with pine cones. He moves the stones in the water. He brings his right hand to his mouth before returning it to the stones in the water. New video segment. Jack lies on his back on a mat with chimes suspended above him. He moves the chimes with his right hand while wiggling his feet and toes. New video segment. Jack lies on his back in a little room with objects suspended over his upper body and feet. Using both hands, he bats at objects in a large wooden castanet. He wiggles his toes and feet. The video segment. Jack is positioned upright in a hopsa dress. Beneath his bare feet is a tub of large plastic pegs and a tub of dry ice. Attached to the waist of the hopsa dress are strings of beads and a large piece of aluminum. Jack pivots with his pegs. The video segment. Jack lies on his back on a carpeted floor at home. He wiggles and stomps his feet. He rolls onto his side and back to his back. He rolls onto his stomach, then all the way over to his back again. The The video segment. Jack lies on his back on a carpeted floor at home.
Go on, bud.
He bends his knees and draws his legs up toward his chest. He puts his feet on the floor, pausing with his legs crossed. He lifts his legs high and swings them forward, rotating up into a sitting position.
There you have it. We finally caught it. We've seen it many times, but we've never seen you get there. Awesome job, buddy.
A title reads, Video courtesy of Penricton Center for Blind Children.
Was that cool or what? To see him go from laying flat and all the different things that they've done to engage that child in active learning. How amazing. So we know it works. We know it's supported. And so, we can do this. We can do this. Okay, so I just wanted to just put back the dynamic learning cycle so you can see what we've talked about and what we've seen, how those stages interact with each other. And, and as we go from one stage, stage 1, 2, 3, and then on to the new challenge, that's just moving that child up on the developmental scales. That's the way I look at it. Active learning is an approach. So it provides the opportunity to learn. Through learning step by step, a child achieves their prerequisites that will enable him or her to learn at higher and higher levels. So that scaffolding is there. Active learning is not just equipment. I know you saw a lot of different equipment examples there, things that people were using. It is an approach. It's not just the equipment itself, right? So, just know that. You may be able to do some of this active learning without all of that equipment because it's an approach to teaching. Active learning establishes enriched environments so that learning can occur for these kids. Okay, so always keep that in mind, that it's an approach, is not necessarily just materials. There is an active learning newsletter, and so there is a link here. When you click on it, it just goes to a website, and it's part of the Perkins School for the Blind. So if you just fill this in and click subscribe, you'll start receiving their newsletters that are focused on active learning. So I thought that'd be important. Of course, staying tuned for the final 2 webinars in this series that I'm doing. We'll focus on the strategies and implementations of active learning with students who are blind or visually impaired with multiple impairments. And I have a list of resources that in the meantime, if you'd like and you have time to explore them, they are all listed there for you. You just have to click on the hyperlinks, and that's it. So thank you. And we have a little time left for some questions. Hope I didn't bore you.
I did have one come through on the chat box earlier. Sorry. What is your assessment? Wait a minute, it moved. On a student who is doing a learning activity, but they keep yawning and looking sleepy. As soon as we leave that activity, the student is awake again. Is the yawning part of overprocessing or boredom?
Are they still engaged and active with whatever it is that they were involved with, or?
Hi, this is Susan Budd.
Go ahead.
I'm the one that asked the question.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yeah. I was referring to my daughter when she's working with a speech therapist. Now she doesn't talk, but we use an iPad with some buttons on it that she can make decisions on. And every time we have her speech therapy session, she yawns and she'll still be engaged, but it'll, after a while, but I don't think it's boredom, but I didn't know if the yawning could indicate something like using your slides today. What's a way that we could include active learning with the process of her making selections on an iPad?
So making selections on an iPad, well, is she able to reach out and tap on, touch things?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, I definitely would not suggest hanging the iPad so that she, can actively engage with that. I mean, that might be, a little risky. I might start with, if you want her to engage with certain things on the iPad, I might make like replicas of like the app or the image or whatever it is that you are wanting her to make choices on or choose on the iPad. I would do that, make replicas that are big enough for her to see, and then to become interested in those things, habituate them, and start interacting with replicas.
No, we already do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like she'll make the choices on the iPad, but I'm wondering if, should we like have her feet doing something while we're working with her hands at the iPad, or?
So you're helping her make choices on the iPad. She's not doing it herself.
No, she will do it herself.
Okay. Yeah, the thing about it is with these kids, again, you don't need to be doing something else while they're focusing on interacting with the object that you're wanting, that they are engaged in, because then distraction, right? And you're concerned that the yawning might be she's bored. She's already learned to do this stuff with the iPad and she's bored, right? Or that's what you're thinking. So I would look at are you doing that at the same time of the day? Is she on medication for anything in particular? And when that medication takes effect, is it around the time of of the speech therapy when this is happening, and why that may be why she's yawning? It may just be one of the bios for her. Maybe changing the time of day that you do the speech therapy, or just changing the activity all. Ready to move on to the next thing because she's got down, that activity. She knows how to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it cut out a little bit in there.
Darn it. I'm sorry. No, I was just saying that maybe it the time of day. If it's the same time of day that you're doing the speech therapy, she might already be fatigued by that time. If it's medication that she takes and the medication may end at that time, and that might have an effect on why she might be yawning. And if it's not those things, then maybe it is the activity itself, that maybe she's already habituated to it. She's done enough repetition with it. It's like, I know what I'm doing with this. I'm ready. So that could be it too. So you're gonna have to try those two out and see which one helps stop the yawning, so that you know whether or not she's trying to communicate to you that, okay, I'm done, or maybe we need to do this at a different time so that my medicine's not kicking in, or my fatigue in, because that might be what's that happens. It all depends, you know, if they're on medication, especially when it kicks in.
Okay, thank you.
You're getting a little bit more breaking up there for a second.
Oh, darn.
All right, I don't see anything else coming up. Does anybody else have questions? This is the time.
Oh, I just see right now the question about the access to the links in YouTube videos. Are all linked on the PowerPoints. On the PowerPoint itself, the image, or in the title of that particular slide, hyperlinked. So it'll just go straight there. All they have to do is put their mouse over. And
Okay, well, I want to thank all of you who hung in with the technical glitches and were here with us this afternoon. I hope it was good for you. I think there was some really great information, and we want you to come back to the next ones if you're so inclined. Anything else, Elia?
Oh, I think that's it.
All right.
That's it for now.
All right, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.